conspiracy or old news? That is the operative question that we have right now, especially in light of DNI Tulsi Gabbard making these pretty substantial claims, and actually extraordinary. It's no exaggeration to say this is one of the biggest political charges that's been made, certainly in a long, long time, maybe ever, that the claim that a former president of the United States attempted a coup against another president. I don't think that anything like that has ever happened. And those are some huge, huge charges being made by the DNI Gabbard. And so we want to try to do a deep dive on this to find out, is the evidence that has been provided, does it justify that, or does it raise more questions? I think that you can probably tell where we're going already is that I'm not seeing the hard evidence that would support such a salacious claim. And to try to unpack this today, we have the privilege of having Julian Barnes on the show for the first time. He's an intel and national security reporter for New York Times, and he's written a bunch on this topic going back years. So I'm really grateful to have you on the show today, Julian. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Thanks a lot for having me on. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, listen, I just, before we even get into this, I just wonder if you could just kind of tell us what your thoughts were when you first heard about this, because obviously with the Mueller report, with the Senate Intel Committee during Trump's first administration, their 3-year report came out. A lot of this stuff has been talked about a lot of times in the Steele dossier and the Russia hoax, all this kind of stuff. This stuff has been covered a lot in the past. But when this came up here, did you think that, wait, do you have some new information, or is this a regurgitation of the old stuff?
Oh, well, all reporters who have been working in D.C. for any amount of time have a little bit of PTSD when you bring us back to the Russia reporting of President Trump's first term. That was a fairly intense time. So absolutely right. I was surprised when this came up and that we were going to relitigate it. On the other hand, I am not someone who says we don't want to see new facts. When an intelligence officer says, hey, we have more information to put out about something, I want to see it. I want to see what can get declassified. But to your point, this is ground that had been heavily gone over, right? We have a bipartisan Senate report, 5 volumes of it. We had lots and lots of independent newspaper reporting of it. The Mueller report, obviously, and then the first Trump administration's critique of that. So it's a high bar to clear for new information. There are some new emails here. There is a report from the House now that we haven't seen before. So we need to approach this with an open mind. But Republicans, Democrats, Trump partisans have not before now made the charges that we've heard from the Director of National Intelligence. So a degree of skepticism is warranted when somebody is saying conspiracy or coup.
Yeah, and in fact, for anybody who may have missed it yesterday, here is DNI Gabbard yesterday specifically leveling that charge.
There is irrefutable evidence that detail how President Obama and his national security team directed the creation of an intelligence community assessment that they knew was false. They knew it would promote this contrived narrative that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help President Trump win, selling it to the American people as though it were true. It wasn't. The report that we released today shows in great detail how they carried this out. They manufactured findings from shoddy sources. They suppressed evidence and credible intelligence that disproved their false claims. They disobeyed traditional tradecraft intelligence community standards and withheld the truth from the American people. In doing so, they conspired to subvert the will of the American people who elected Donald Trump in that election in November of 2016. They worked with their partners in the media to promote this lie, ultimately to undermine the legitimacy of President Trump and launching what would be a years-long coup against him and his administration.
There's a lot to unpack there, but let me just ask you one question, given your position as a reporter for possibly the most influential newspaper in America today, in New York Times. She says that the Obama administration, in collusion with the mainstream media, put forth an untrue narrative. How do you respond to that? At least from
Well,
the New
look,
York Times perspective.
yeah, I mean, from the perspective of a journalist, right? We frequently hear people who do not like news stories criticizing reporters for publishing information early from what they would say were leaks or sources. Um, you know, this is the job of a journalist in a free society, is to go to government officials, to ask them what they're thinking, to try to figure out where things are going, not just to wait till a decision is made, but really try to figure out what the debate is going on. And so I really do think that the journalists from the New York Times, the Washington Post were working honorably in the fall and winter of 2016 when they were pushing hard to try to find out what the intelligence agencies knew and how their thinking was developing. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I don't think it's um, malevolent. I don't think it was wrong. I think it was journalists doing their job.
And so I guess, would it be fair to say that if any of these officials were spread knowing misinformation and told, whether it's the New York Times, Washington Post, anybody, that a certain thing happened and they reported on that, they wouldn't have any idea whether it was true or not. They're just reporting on what's being told, which could it could end up being used to spread a false narrative is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, the journalists are acting with trying to get at the truth here. You know, we're looking for sources who we believe are going to tell us the truth. When our sources don't tell us the truth, we come out and we correct the record. The issue here, and we're going to talk about it more, I imagine, is this idea of whether, Vladimir Putin favored Donald Trump, right? And that was what was breaking in the Post and in the Times as these intelligence assessments were being developed. And the theory of the case here is that is wrong, and so therefore the journalists were wrong to report it. The sources were wrong to tell the journalists that. But we'll talk about it more, but I do not think that claim is disproven yet, as much as that Republicans in general do not like it, disagree with it. Ms. Gabbard disagreed with it from the podium. But any case that the journalists were pushing out false narratives is saying that is false, and that hasn't been proven to be false yet.
And let me ask you that. So, and Gary, this will be a little bit out of order here, but this is Marco Rubio, then Senator Rubio, in 2020, in August 2020, if I'm not mistaken, saying what their 3-year examination into this situation. Again, this is a Republican-led during the Trump administration timeframe. Here's what he said.
Over the last 3 years, the Senate Intelligence Committee conducted a bipartisan and thorough investigation into Russian efforts to influence the 2016 election. After interviewing over 200 witnesses and reviewing over 1 million pages of documents, we can now say 3 things without any hesitation. First, we found absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Donald Trump or his campaign colluded with Russia to meddle in our elections. Second, the FBI made some very troubling mistakes, especially by relying on a Steele dossier against the advice of the CIA and without verifying this foreign document or the sources that were used to create it. And third, Russia's still meddling, and now so is China and Iran.
So that was what he said, and this is the document that he revealed, or that he released at an association with that, which has, if you scroll down here, one of the key findings. The committee found that the Russian government engaged in an aggressive, multifaceted effort to influence or attempt to influence the outcome of the 2016 presidential elections. Now, I haven't seen anything that has contradicted that. But after 3 years, that seemed to be his assessment then. Why has it changed now?
Well, on that point, phrased in that way, I don't think the assessment has changed. I think if Ms. Gabbard was on your show right now and you put that sentence to her, Russia meddled in the election, she would agree with that, right? She said herself, "So chaos," at that White House press conference. So I think that there still, however tenuously, there is not unanimity, but there's broad agreement on that phrase. Where we get into a debate is on Russia's intentions with that meddling. And there are three things people say. They want to sow chaos. Everyone agrees with that. They wanted to denigrate Hillary Clinton. Most people agree with that. They wanted to help Donald Trump. Republicans in general reject that, and Democrats embrace that. Now, there's not a lot of difference. You can make a case, you can make an argument of how supporting Donald Trump and denigrating Hillary Clinton are two different things, but they're probably opposite sides of the same coin. They're very interrelated. And there's not a lot of debate from Marco Rubio, from Tulsi Gabbard, probably, that Vladimir Putin was out to hurt Hillary Clinton. It's just, do you take that other step in terms of aiding Mr. Trump? Democrats will, Republicans won't. But we should not lose sight that there is broad agreement on that point you raised, that the Russians meddled in 2016, and it was proven.
Right. So then the question is going to, and it sounds like we're getting in more of an interpretation issue here.
Yes.
Was the Russian effort designed to tip the election in Trump's favor, or, which my assessment is from what I've seen from all this, is that they were basically willing to play it either way. If Hillary Clinton had won, they were going to use something against her. If Trump won, they were going to try to do something with him. But I think that probably if you ask anybody at the time, and by the way, Tulsi Gabbard said this on a Joe Rogan podcast years ago, that, I mean, it makes sense why they would prefer Trump, because Hillary Clinton was running on a very antagonistic Russian program, that she was going to be hard on Russia, and Trump was wanting to have good relations. So it seems like they would naturally agree with that. But it looked to me like the Russians were playing both sides against the middle so that they would try to sow discord, but also try to benefit on the other side. How do you see it?
Well, that's absolutely right. I would, a large number of experts agree with exactly what you said. It is the intent in the end, where when you're trying to get into Vladimir Putin's head, where it becomes a debate. But when we can see their actions, like to rile up the left, to rile up the right, to try to get them to fight, to throw out divisive documents hacked from the DNC. At the very least, that was to sow chaos, that was to meddle, that was to undermine faith in American democracy. And, because of the leaked documents, there's an abundance of evidence that it was to undermine Hillary Clinton. The evidence on whether they supported Donald Trump comes down to sort of one main source who was close to, or who had access to, Vladimir Putin's internal discussions. And that is part of what the documents Tulsi Gabbard has released this week on Wednesday to documents she said undermined the credibility of that source. Though if you talk to other former officials who have knowledge about that source and what he told the American government, they have a lot more. They believe that source has a lot of credibility.
Yeah. Okay. So then, as far as that goes, it just matters who you want to believe. But there was evidence that could indicate both sides had a point anyway. Bottom line is Russia was doing something. Towards what end is a matter of interpretation. Okay, that's one thing. But now then we're getting what's being alleged here is a conspiracy and an intent to overthrow the Trump. That's the word she used. And I'm not interpreting on that one. A coup is a treasonous act, almost however you want to describe it. So let's first of all, one of the things that this hinges on is her allegation, Secretary Gabbard's or Director Gabbard's allegation that there was a presidential daily brief on the 8th of December, which was pulled before it went out. And she has some problems with that, both that and then also what happened, I think, on December 6th with what was reported internally.
I'm going to go over the key findings from the House Intelligence Report, which investigated the claims that were made by an intelligence community assessment ordered by President Obama and published in January of 2017. First, Putin's principal interests relating to the 2016 election were to undermine faith in the U.S. democratic process, not show any preference of a certain candidate. In fact, this report shows Putin held back from leaking compromising material on Hillary Clinton prior to the election, instead planning to release it after the election to weaken what Moscow viewed as an inevitable Clinton presidency. In the January 2017 intelligence community assessment that President Obama ordered, John Brennan, who was CIA director at the time, and the intelligence community intentionally suppressed intelligence that showed Putin was saving the most damaging material that he had in his possession about Hillary Clinton until after her potential and likely victory. Then CIA Director Brennan and the intelligence community mischaracterized intelligence and relied on dubious substandard sources to create a contrived false narrative that Putin developed a quote-unquote clear preference for Trump. Brennan and the IC misled lawmakers by referencing the debunked Steele dossier to assess quote-unquote Russia's plans and intentions, falsely suggesting that this dossier had intelligence value when he knew that it was discredited.
Now, I'm going to talk about the Steele dossier separately, so I want to leave that one alone for the moment, other than it's clearly been discredited. But she claims that there was an active intent to change the intelligence and to suppress other information about that Hillary thing there. Now, you've been working in the intelligence world for quite a long time as a reporter. When I hear that, and when I've looked at some of the documents that she has provided here, I don't see evidence of suppression. But you can't put everything in every report, and you have to make an estimates on what's important and what's not. And I don't see evidence of suppression that wasn't included in a particular report. What do you think?
I have to agree with you on that. I don't think she's made the case yet for suppression of evidence. Look, she has, with what she has released and with what John Ratcliffe, director of the CIA, has released, they have demonstrated a rushed process, that the Obama administration was moving very quickly. The president was putting pressure on them to reach a decision. And you see Brennan being very hands-on in a process, both with what Tulsi Gabbard just said in your clip, also what was in John Ratcliffe's tradecraft review of a few weeks ago. And there are CIA analysts, both former and current, who are like, it was an ideal process. It was rushed. But we have to, in this case, take a kind of political step back. Any president will say, hey, I want this done quickly. That is not a conspiracy. That's, that's presidential prerogative, right? If a president said,
I'll point out that at that time, because the directive was given on, I want to say the 9th of December 2016, and they had a 30-day time frame. We're supposed to be back on the 9th of January 2017, which was itself only 11 days before he left office. So they had to move quick. And then actually one of the emails that Tulsi released here, you see some of the action officers apologizing to many of the people who were working on this, saying, hey, I know that we're going to have to work during the holidays and all this other stuff. We just don't have enough time, which I guess underscores your comment there about it being rushed, but you didn't have much more time anyway.
Yeah, and Director Gabbard is making an interpretation that shows an intent to undermine President Trump, right? But that seems to be a more exquisite interpretation. It's just an easier interpretation, one that lines up with the reporting we've done, one that lines up with what have been talking to former officials on. The president rightly wanted an answer to this thing that happened. On his watch, there had been Russian meddling in an election, right? And it is reasonable for a president before they left office to get the intelligence assessments about what went on. If President Trump had said, I want this done in 30 days, you can complain that it's something is rushed, but the president of the United States has the power and the right to order that kind of work if the president thinks it's important enough to do quickly. It doesn't strike me as a conspiracy. It may have been politically stupid given everything that happened later. It may not have been wise, but it is understandable and it doesn't seem criminal.
Right. And especially when you look at, like I said, January 9th was just 11 days before he was out of power. So he didn't have the luxury to say take 60 days because he would have had no control over it after he left office. One of the other things that is really alleged here as getting into what's allegedly a criminal stuff is the manufacturing of intelligence. Not, as Director Gabbard has said several times, we're not talking about misusing intelligence, but manufacturing it. So that is key here. And here's what she said about this. I believe it was the January 8th PDB that was pulled, or December 8th.
As was reflected in the ODNI documents that we released on Friday, multiple intelligence community assessments released in the months leading up to the November 2016 election concluded that Russia had neither the intent nor capability to impact the outcome of the U.S. election. On December 5th of 2016, the FBI and ODNI gave the House Intelligence Committee its first post-election classified briefing, in which there was no mention of Putin aspiring to elect Trump by either agency. The Presidential Daily Brief, drafted on December 8th of 2016, stated that no Russian or criminal actors impacted vote counts. This document was pulled just hours before it was to be published due to quote-unquote new guidance.
Now, this is where we're starting to get in where she's alleging that there was some nefarious and illegal activity, quote, new guidance. The implication being that they're going to now manufacture this. But I think this is probably a good time. I want to go to the actual documents themselves because there's a lot of interesting information in here, which I think is important to know. So first of all, I want to start off on the let's see, this is this is the December 9th. This is the so-called secret meeting that she refers to several times. And you see there's quite a lot of people on here. It was chaired by Susan Rice. They had Clapper, John Brennan, quite a number of other people. Victoria Nuland, Secretary of State John Kerry. He was there by Secure Video Teleconference. That's what that stands for right there. And so you roll down to that and you see, what was discussed at this. So this is where you would expect, based on what she said, that there's going to be some kind of secret information here that talks about what they're going to change. Now, most of it is just kind of normal stuff, just kind of the normal business that they were going through until you get down to, I think it's the bottom of this page. Oh, I may have went too far. Yes. So the first one here, principals agreed to recommend sanctioning certain members of the Russian military intelligence and foreign intelligence chains of command responsible for cyber operations as a response to cyber activity that attempted to influence or interfere with the U.S. election. If such activity meets requirements for designation under executive order, blah, 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 then they'll refer to the Department of Treasury to take action. Now, it's important to point out here, this is a previously classified document. This was nothing public. People aren't writing things in here so that it looks a certain way. This is what they certainly felt and they thought would never see the light of day. But they're claiming as a given on the 9th of December that there was an attempt to influence or interfere with the U.S. election. And so they go on to say that they wanted the principals meeting, that they wanted to exert more information. They wanted to find out some more here. Now that goes down to, let me see if I got the right page here. This is one of the other things she responds to. This is the POTUS tasking on Russian election meddling here. So she cites this specific email as being the one where they started changing things. And when you're talking about pursuant to the statement, it's pursuant to the POTUS tasking at Monday's meeting after the Russian election meddling for a comprehensive assessment. The DNI broached the talking points below with Dennis McDonough and the DCI, et cetera. So then you look to, all right, what was the actual in guidance here? It says the goal would be to produce a highly classified version and an unclassified version that would include a comprehensive analysis of Russia's activities. So far, nothing in here about here's what you're supposed to find, et cetera. Then this is the crucial part to me. The interagency steering group, she said in that last clip we had that there were only 5 people, and this is not the way it normally works. But you look at this, and this is a lot more than 5 people. Interagency tiger teams, and if people who don't know tiger teams, that's basically just kind of a phrase that's used a lot in government and military, to where you have a group of people focused on one thing, and then there'll be another group focused on something else, and you see that here. CIA, FBI, NSA officers will participate. DHS and OSE analysts will also contribute. And then here's what Obama directed. This is the key part. How did Moscow seek to influence U.S. presidential election in 2016? What tools did they use? And then they look at these. The hacking, so CIA, FBI, NSA will lead. Leaks, cyber activity among voting system, media spin, trolls, fake news, etc., domestic Russian intelligence agencies, etc. So there's nothing here telling people what they're going to have. There's no manufacturing. It's a lot of questions that the president asked. And I don't know, Julian, you tell me, this looks like a very reasonable set of questions to be asking.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were in charge, I was in charge, these are the kinds of questions we would come up with here. So the you've hit on the right thing, both in Director Gabbard's clip and in the documents that you're showing your viewers there. There are 2 things going on here. There's a list of 5 things, but there are 2 that are most important in terms of the questions, right? What did Russia do to hack election systems to go in and change votes? And throughout much of 2016, that's what the intelligence agencies were interested in. Like, could they attack voting tabulation in swing districts? Could they get into voting machines? Could the American people vote one way and Russia control the outcome to come another way, right? And so throughout the summer of 2016, that's the cyber threat that the US government was mostly focused on. And you see that it's one of the bullet points there in terms of the cyber infrastructure of voting machines. But in reality, the Russians got into a couple systems, didn't change any votes. They realized, which a couple of years later, the IC would declare much more clearly, that Russia had decided there was no way in America to hack votes and change voting systems, right? We have voting is local in the United States. That's our great strength. There are tens of thousands of different counties and cities that you would have to hack in order to change a vote, and not possible to do. The US didn't know that in the summer of 2016. The Russians were figuring it out in the summer of 2016. So that's one thing that happened, and that's why there was only, when there was a determination in the summer that the Russians weren't going to be able to do that or didn't do that, they didn't completely miss, but they did not completely understand the importance of the influence operations, right? There's sometimes the IC will say interference, meaning hacking voting systems, and influence, meaning an information operation. Now, on that bullet point, you said this was in a couple different places, but leaks. That meant like the hacking of the DNC and the leaking out of Hillary Clinton's, about emails that were denigrating Hillary Clinton or were embarrassing to Hillary Clinton from the DNC. That had some impact on the election. And then there's influence operations like on the Russians going in to rile up different groups of America on Facebook or other social media with fake accounts, right? Now, we spent a lot of time looking at that. There's differences of opinion on how important that was, but that was very much of sowing dissent in America. The hacks were very much about undermining Hillary Clinton. Maybe they were about advancing Donald Trump, but they were definitely about hacking Hillary Clinton. But it's important to think of these as two different things. In the summer of 2016, the IC was focused on one thing, hacking voting machines. In the fall, they were focused on another thing. Were the influence operations successful? And so that's what accounts for the change in tone, the change in intelligence. They're going from one question to the other. This is not manipulating intelligence. This is not changing intelligence. This is asking different questions, answering different questions.
And now then I want to look at the results of that. So that you saw on the 9th of December said, hey, we need this new assessment. So here was the preliminary answer to that, which was the intelligence community assessment. This is dated on the 5th of January. When you come down and look at the scope, and by the way, for any of those who may not know, all these black lines here, this is stuff that was redacted when they released this previously classified information. Apparently there's stuff under here that we're still not supposed to know. But here's important here. This report includes an analytical assessment drafted and coordinated among the CIA, FBI, and NSA, which draws on intelligence information collected and disseminated by these three agencies. It covers the motivation and scope of Moscow's intentions regarding U.S. elections and Moscow's use of cyber threats and media campaigns, so it's both, to influence U.S. public opinion. That's the scope of it. Then you get down here to the key judgments. Russian efforts to influence the 2016 presidential election represents the most recent expression of Moscow's long-standing desire to undermine U.S.-led liberal democratic order. But these activities demonstrated a significant escalation in directness, level of activity, and scope of effort. We assess, this is the key, that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in the summer of 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process. That's what Tulsi has said here too. Denigrate Secretary Clinton and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess President Putin and Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. Now, that is the assessment of all these people. That's not what Obama told everybody to do, according to the documents that have been shown. And it wasn't just 5 people. It was these 3 agencies and all the people they had working on them. Now, you can disagree with that, I suppose, of that estimate, but they say most of the same things that Tulsi's saying here, but their assessment, and that's important, it was an assessment that they favored Trump. I don't know how they came to that because we don't have that kind of documentation. But do you have any insider information on that?
So I think you're right in the way you characterize that. I mean, that's not really up for debate that much. You know, we've had a lot of evidence that the Russians were doing this, that the Russians were meddling. There's debate over how successful they were. There were debate about whether they had an impact, if they ever influenced how many votes. But they were trying to do it. They have a long history of what they call active measures, which is messing with American democracy, trying to change opinions in America. They believe they can do it. They believe they can be effective at this kind of stuff. So they did it. Donald Trump clearly took this personally and thought it was undermining. It was meant to undermine his presidency, but that's not what the intent of the intelligence officers doing this work. They were merely trying to identify what they considered malign foreign activity. They were not, in general, trying to hurt Donald Trump. They were trying to protect the United States from Russia.
Right. And now, with all that as a setup here, if you're looking at those documents at this point, you can say, I don't necessarily agree with the assessment that they were trying to favor Donald Trump. But again, this is a classified version here, but that those things did happen. So you could quibble with that. But to go
exactly
from
right.
there, to what happens next, I'm just missing the connective tissue, because here's how Tulsi Gabbard says those documents, here's what they prove.
On December 9th, 2016, a National Security Council meeting was called to gather President Obama's senior national security officials, which included CIA Director Brennan, then Obama DNI James Clapper, Susan Rice, and others. Following that secret meeting, DNI Clapper's assistant sent an email to the intelligence community with the subject line, POTUS tasking on Russia election meddling, tasking ODNI leaders to create a new assessment per the president's request. The House Intelligence Committee oversight report that we released today reveals that, quote, unlike routine intelligence community analysis, the intelligence community assessment was a high-profile product ordered by the president, President Obama. It directed senior intelligence community agency heads and created an intelligence community assessment limited to just 5 analysts using one principal drafter. This is not something that occurs in the normal path of producing an intelligence community assessment that reflects the views across the intelligence community. The production of this intelligence community assessment was subject to unusual directives directly from the president and senior political appointees, especially the former director of the CIA, John Brennan.
And you saw, we just looked at the document. There wasn't unusual questions. They were perfectly reasonable questions. And it wasn't just 5 people. There was a whole tiger team and multiple agencies involved, which each one has multiple people. So I just don't know how she goes from that document to make that statement.
I think your comment right before her clip was exactly right. Reasonable people do disagree on that final key judgment, that final point of whether Putin favored Trump, right? And there is a debate on that. And smart people who have looked at this material have come to different views. And so I think as a journalist, as an open-minded journalist, we have to give space for that debate. But it does not logically flow from a debate over how strong the intelligence behind that judgment is to manipulation, toward impropriety, toward something criminal, something amiss. Just because you disagree with the conclusion that was made does not mean it is criminal or that it was done for ill intent.
And, going back also to because her allegation also is of nefarious actions, that the presidential daily brief on the 8th of December was pulled. And some of the questions she's been asked was that because then President-elect Trump would have gotten hold of it and they didn't want him to see it? She says, well, I can't speculate on that, but she obviously did put it out there for a reason.
She did. I will say we do not completely understand why that was pulled, right? They were preparing a more fulsome brief for Donald Trump, the intelligence community assessment of the end of December that this is all about, we're all leading up to that. That was being made under orders from Obama, but from moment one, it was going to be presented to President-elect Trump. And many of what we now know and what we'll talk about in a minute about the errors about the dossier were made because they knew they were going to brief this to Donald Trump. But going to your question right now, pulling the PDB, that PDB was narrowly about election hacking. But by this time, by the early December, they know that it's misleading, perhaps just to talk about one thing. What the president wants to know is the whole picture.
And let me this is what they put. This is the pulled PDB. And you see right off the top, we assess that Russian and criminal actors did not impact the recent U.S. election by conducting malicious cyberware against election infrastructure. That's the only thing this PDB talks about. It doesn't talk about the influence or anything else. It just goes on all kinds of detail talking about whether there was cyber or not, and that they said that it didn't. So to pull this, it does. I don't know why they pulled it, but there's nothing in there that is, because the claim is that it was contradicted and changed after it came out subsequent, but there was a separate issue, which I think you said a second ago.
Right. And I mean, you can imagine, like, if you were in charge of the PDB, if I was in charge of the PDB, and somebody wrote that and brought it to us, and they said, okay, well, we'll give this to the president. And you're like, this is not what the president is asking about right now. The president already knows that this was safe and this was not, in fact, impacted. He's asking about not about what didn't happen. He's asking about what did happen. And it's the same role an editor plays at a newspaper. Like, this is the wrong question to be asking at this time. And so, in hindsight, maybe you throw that in the PDB, but I can see why somebody pulled that back, because we already know the president is interested in a fuller accounting, and this is a very narrow accounting of one important, but not the most important topic at the time.
And what the other thing we don't know is that we have this one sole PDB that was pulled, but what we don't know is anything else about all the ones that came before that, because apparently the 5th
Very good point.
of December is when it was first, I guess they had the first analysis. Well, what did the PDB on the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, et cetera, what did they say? Or the 10th and the 11th, et cetera, were other things discovered? We just don't know. I don't know if it was or not, but I'd sure like to find out.
Yeah. We don't get to see a lot of PDBs, so it's always good when a DNI puts out a PDB, so we can get a sense of how they're written and how information is being presented, even a PDB that doesn't quite make it. So I'm glad that they put this out. But, to your point, it's a piece of information out of context if we don't know what they put in the PDB a week before, 2 weeks before, 2 months before.
Right. And so then that gets into the whole issue of, was this an intent? Was there a specific intent to undermine President Trump? And that's, I think, where we're going to get into the more difficult issues here. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're going to get back to the Steele dossier, because I think this may be one of the areas where the director is on more firm footing. Here's what she said about that.
The House Intel report states, quote, contradicting public claims by then CIA Director Brennan that the dossier was not in any way incorporated into this intelligence assessment. The dossier was referenced in the intelligence assessment's main body text and further detailed in a 2-page assessment annex. John Brennan lied, and he denied using this dossier in this intelligence assessment that President Obama ordered because he knew it was discredited. It was a politically motivated, manufactured document. He directed senior CIA officials to use it anyway.
Now, according to what she's released anyway, apparently Brennan did know that thing was discredited, what it used, but yet he did push it to try and make Trump look bad. What do you know from your reporting on that issue?
Yeah, this is important. There's a lot of details around it. And let me say, at the top, objectively, with history as our guide, looking back, letting the Steele dossier anywhere near the ICA was a terrible political error that undermined a important intelligence document by associating it with a unverified piece of rumant. The Steele dossier either was repeating stuff that was widely reported in the news and everybody knew, or had salacious allegations that have never been proven in the subsequent years, right? And you can see from what Tulsi Gabbard has put out and what John Ratcliffe put out, and even, quite frankly, what John Brennan wrote in his book, CIA analysts knew that this was not a piece of serious intelligence. The Steele dossier was written by a former British intelligence officer, Christopher Steele. It was circulating around Washington in 2016. Some journalists had seen it. The FBI got a hold of it. The CIA looked at it and said, "This is just baloney. This is not serious work. We need to distance." Now, James Comey decided that since the FBI knew about this, had the dossier in its hands, they couldn't pretend they didn't have it. They had to let President Trump, President-elect Trump, know they had it so they didn't look like they were hiding something from him. So Comey was lobbying Brennan very hard to put the reference to the ICA in the document, in an annex at the end. The FBI was to some degree taking the thing seriously. The CIA was not. There was a compromise. It was put in as an annex, but as Tulsi Gabbard showed this week, there was a bullet point in the main part that referred you to the annex. Looking back, that was really, really stupid, because this unverified bit of rumor that is not true got placed into this other document, and therefore it undermines that document. I've talked to many people who were involved in the production of this, and they all agree that it was incredibly stupid to let the Steele dossier into this document. I don't know. I do not think, I have not seen evidence that the Steele dossier colored the work of the NSA or the CIA in terms of their analysis. But somebody attached it to the ICA, and that was really, really stupid.
Yeah, because it has definitely undermined its credibility, and then now leads to all kinds of conspiracies that, or suspicions rather, that was primarily the driver, et cetera, that was done intentionally. And then I don't think it's unreasonable to suspect that Brennan didn't push something because he apparently didn't like Trump at all. And so who knows whether that is something that he did intentionally or not. Maybe that's something that needs to be checked out, and whatever else he may have done if he intentionally tried to influence people in a way that he knew wasn't accurate. But that doesn't get us back to where we started, which was, is President Obama guilty of treason? Did he manufacture intelligence, and did he intend to unseat President Trump? I have heard no evidence at all on that. And what the evidence that has been shown shows that he asked very reasonable questions and got the answer back from the experts, and then that was subsequently published. So I totally am missing this. Now, apparently I'm not the only one, because at the question and answer period after that interview yesterday, that press briefing, one of the reporters asked that very question.
The president yesterday, you've inferred that the former president helped lead a coup. Based on what you now see, do you believe President Obama is guilty of treason?
I'm leaving the criminal charges to the Department of Justice. I am not an attorney, but as I've said previously, when you look at the intent behind creating a fake manufactured intelligence document that directly contradicts multiple assessments that were created by the intelligence community, the expressed intent and what followed afterward can only be described as a years-long coup and a treasonous conspiracy against the American people, our republic, and an attempt to undermine President Trump's administration.
That's a really strong charge. Again, she repeats it in there. But Julian, am I missing something somewhere? There seems to be some connective tissue she hasn't provided that shows criminal intent. I just don't see it. How do you read that answer?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, President Trump and his allies have long been upset with John Brennan for his outspoken criticism of President Trump during his first term. He was one of the loudest, sharpest critics on MSNBC and other outlets, right? And so I do think a lot of this is anger at how John Brennan characterized and spoke about this. And that does show the danger of someone who has a nonpartisan job, and being head of the CIA or head of the DNI is a job where you're supposed to stay out of politics. And the John Brennan, he was probably acting out of good faith, or but his strong criticism is part of the anger that Republicans have about this document, right? But there is no evidence in the documents that John Radcliffe has put out. There's no evidence in the documents that DNI Gabbard has put out. There's no evidence in the 2017 report that the House Republicans did, or the bipartisan report that the Senate Democrats and Republicans did together, that there was any manipulation of the intelligence. There's no evidence that the president was asking for an intelligence assessment to change. We've tried to explain to your viewers and listeners here why that is, what the confusion is, why that there's not manipulation, why there's multiple questions being asked. But there's no smoking gun here. There's no even like evidence pointing to the president or putting a thumb on the scale. So, you know, she has not made the case yet, you know, and this is one reason you're supposed to stay out of politics.
Right. Well, so, but let me ask you on the back part there. So there's two separate things involved here in what she said in that last clip. There is that one, that there was a conspiracy to change things, and then the last part there was, though, to have a years-long coup on President Trump. A coup means you're trying to get someone out of power. I haven't even seen the allegations so far, and have you? What does she mean by that? How was any of this supposed to get Trump out of office? That's what a coup is.
Yes, I can't answer that question. I do not know. However, the reason this is being phrased in that way, right, is if you were intending to make a charge against a member of the Obama administration, you cannot use a perjury charge because the statute of limitations is passed. You can't just do a conspiracy charge about the events in December 2016 because that's too far in the past. You have to have ongoing acts. And if you listen to what President Trump said earlier in this week when he was doing one of his famous weaves, and he was weaving from the 2016 intelligence assessment to the 2020 election, where he has said without evidence that there was an attempt to strip him of a victory in 2020, he has linked those things. And so if you want to make a charge of conspiracy, you need to go from 2016 to 2020 or 2021. And so that's why rhetorically we hear public figures making this link. But I see no logical leap, and I certainly see no evidence that ties the intelligence assessment of 2016 to subsequent events in Donald Trump's presidency, and certainly not the 2020 vote.
But isn't there a risk here for both the president and the director of national intelligence that you've made, I mean, by their own accounting, something that's, earthquakes happening that just, it's never been happened before, bigger than Watergate, they're saying. But if you don't have any evidence to actually substantiate a criminal charge, and again, from what's been released so far, I haven't seen anything even suggesting that Obama took part in an intentional activity in order to undermine and get rid of President Trump. I haven't seen anything, and you have to have it. So if they don't do that, and they've made all these statements in Trump, I could have shown a bunch of comments he's made in just the last 36 hours or so. I mean, he's basically talking like the party's already over and everything's been proven, and yet nothing's even been submitted, or nothing's come out anyway, of the Justice Department. So if you can't do that, and nothing's ever, no charges ever come, much less anybody ever convicted anything, don't they come off looking like, wait, you made claims that aren't substantiated?
I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, President Trump's supporters are not stupid, and they don't have short memories. I mean, and I think the debate over the Epstein files shows that, right? His supporters are saying, well, we were promised more information. We want to see more information. If the president of the United States, if the director of national intelligence makes a promise to the president that there's going to be some action or more information or something's going to happen, the president's going to want to see that. If the president says something is going to happen, his followers are his supporters are going to want to see action. But there's no there when it comes to a conspiracy or a coup by President Obama. And furthermore, whatever Obama did in December and January of December 2016, January 2017, were an official act of the president. And the Supreme Court has said in the litigation over Donald Trump and Jack Smith that the president has a lot of leeway on his official acts. You cannot prosecute the president for his official acts. And there's no way they're going to prosecute. We've talked to multiple people. They're not going to be able to prosecute Barack Obama.
Ironically, even if they had a smoking gun evidence, from what I understand from the precedent by the Supreme Court, they still wouldn't be able to do anything. Is that true?
I mean, I'm not a legal expert. Get your legal expert on this show to talk about it. But from what the layman's reads that opinion and the dissent, yes, if it's an official act of the president, and certainly giving an order to the intelligence agencies is an official act, you cannot be held criminal liable for that. The Justice Roberts has written that very clearly.
And yet we also see that, at least from what's been released so far, I mean, if she has other information to release that shows this, then we'll certainly update it. But from what we've seen so far, I mean, the absence of any kind of connective tissue between the charge and what has been provided. And I that puzzles me, honestly, why there's such a strong charge and then no connective tissue. I don't understand that part. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
I mean, when you don't show the connective tissue, it opens you up to argue to allegations of politicization and weaponization. And Director Gabbard came into office saying she wanted to stamp out weaponization of intelligence. She wanted to stamp out politicization. And if she makes broad charges without evidence, she's going to open herself up to that very allegation. I mean, she's on stronger ground when she's releasing material and she's sticking to the facts. She could debate that third key judgment of whether
Russia actually desired him to win.
Trump.
Yeah,
she could debate exactly how much the Steele dossier played a part in the ICA. Those are more narrow subjects. Yeah. Those are subjects. They're for valid debate. There are valid positions on both sides. There are things, we are learning more things about that. We can talk about that. But to go from there to coup, there's, as you said, no connective tissue.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today, because I kept wondering if maybe I was just missing something. And I know you've got a lot of experience at this, so we wanted to see, but it seems like you're seeing a lot of the same information, the same things that I do. So I guess we'll just have to keep watching and see if there are any more information dumps.
Exactly right. We keep an open mind. When more information comes, we listen, we read, we try to make sense of it. But sometimes we also have to ask hard questions when that connective tissue is not there.
We do. And we really appreciate you providing some clarity on some historical context to this too, from your reporting over. So we really appreciate that too. Anybody who wants to continue to know more about Julian Barnes can go to his Twitter there at Julian Barnes. And then, I'm sorry, X, no longer Twitter, or at the New York Times. Thanks so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And we thank you guys too. Always appreciate you coming on and joining us. And by the way, if any of your friends who like podcasts, I know a lot of people would prefer to get their information via podcast, and maybe they won't watch a video. Let your friends know that we're on podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Just have them type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and they will find us waiting there for them. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.